And once again, I want to say greetings to each and every one of you, Aquala, and welcome. Welcome to another round of the Conscious Rasta Report here on LIB Radio, LIB TV, and on livinginblack.com. My name is Kidi Awadu, aka the Conscious Rasta. Weekday mornings, you and I get together live. We come at you from 9 a.m. Pacific time. It's 12 noon Eastern Time, 5 p.m. GMT, and 8 p.m. East Africa Time. We get together with you and we deal with culture, consciousness, historical perspectives. We deal with entertainment, economics, education, health, labor, law, politics, religion, family, conflict, future studies, all areas of human interactivity and human development. Today's date is Monday. This is the 26th day of January, the year 2026 in the Western calendar. That corresponds to the year 6266 in the Kemetic calendar, to which we realign our cultural clock. Welcome to the 7th millennium. You have found your family in a peaceful place here on LIB Radio, LIB TV, here on livinginblack.com. I'm very excited this morning. And I woke up early today. My phone was ringing. I thought it was my alarm clock. I said, well, I don't necessarily recognize the different tones that I have set up, but Carl Nelson had called me and asked me to sit in for his guest, Dr. Gerald Horn, an individual who I highly respect, Dr. Horn, who had had something come up and he could not be Carl's guest. And so Carl called me, and I was able to sit in and be his guest today on the very exciting Carl Nelson show. And I just want to say, first of all, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with my brother today. And here, let me remove this from the screen. And to be able to relate to the people. The Carl Nelson show is a wonderful place of relative community. And it's very important to all of our being. But I got a chance to talk about my upcoming book, and that's what today's topic is. We're going to share another chapter, another couple of chapters on my new book. As fast as I can read it into the record, we're going to get the new book into the record. And I think you're really going to enjoy the new book and this new conversation. So today we are talking about part 2 of the book. It's entitled The Conscious Roots, Growth, Heritage, and the Biology of Being. Welcome to the Conscious Rasta Report, where heritage meets science and consciousness fuels growth. In my new book, The Conscious Roots, Growth, Heritage, and the Biology of Being, we explore deep ties between our ancestry, our cells, and our success. We discover how identity, biology, and legacy intertwine to shape who we are and who we can become. The book is rooted in truth, and we, rooted in truth, will rise with purpose. So this is what the book is about. One more paragraph, The Conscious Roots, of metaphor for transformative society. A metaphor of conscious roots serves as a symbolic framework for understanding how deeply embedded awareness and intentionality can influence societal transformation. Just as roots nourish and support a plant, a collective consciousness can sustain and enrich the communities that we inhabit. In examining this metaphor, it becomes evident that a transformative society hinges on several foundational principles: awareness of interconnectedness, ethical mindfulness, and active participation in growth and change. So that is a brief introduction from the back cover of the book. The book is, and again, entitled The Conscious Roots, Growth, Heritage, and the Biology of Being. And it's all very, very important. Now, if you don't mind, let's get into some text And I'm going to put this up on the screen. I believe you can see it right now. We're going to be beginning with chapter 3 of the book. This is where we left off last Friday. And we're going to do as much as we can with this today. And I think you will be wonderfully impressed. So I do see you in the house for Africa One, my beloved sister Hotep, Brother Keedy, and Global LIB family. Hotep to you as well. And I'm looking, I see also in the chat on YouTube, we do see Kiki Blunts is in the house. So welcome to you, Kiki. She says hey to the Global family and for Africa One, Hotep, Brother Keedy, and Global LIB family. Let's go into the text. If you're having any problem reading the text on the screen or anything, you'll have to let me know in the chat. For Africa One, you're very, very good at helping us at that. Now, I'm going to take a sip of my tea. I'm not going to slurp. I did slurp a little bit. And let's go into the text. Chapter 3, stress, trauma, and the nervous system. I began with this quote from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk from The Body Keeps the Score, is her book. His book, I believe it is. Trauma produces actual physiological changes, including a recalibration of the brain's alarm system, an increase in stress hormone. I write, the body remembers what the mind forgets. There is violence in modern life that draws no blood, yet its wounds cut deep. It does not announce itself with gunfire or brutality, but with the relentless hum of urgency, the constant demand for attention, the pressure to produce, perform, and perpetually respond. This is the violence of disconnection, an assault of a world that has forgotten the body's need for rhythm, for rest, and the spaces between heartbeats where life actually occurs. We speak of stress as though it were merely physiological or psychological, We speak of stress as if it were merely psychological, a feeling, a perception, something that exists only in the mind. But the body knows differently. Stress is as physical as a wound, as measurable as blood pressure, as consequential as infection. When we live in a state of perpetual high alert, when our nervous system remains locked in patterns of threat response, when the urgency of Babylon's demands overrides the wisdom of our biology, we are not simply uncomfortable. We are being rewritten at the cellular level. The pen is mightier than the sword, the saying goes, because ideas can reshape reality more profoundly than violence. But the body, too, is a text being written upon by experience, by environment, by the choices we make, and those made for us. The question before us is this: who holds the pen? Are we conscious authors of our biological story? Or do we allow the systems of oppression and urgency to write their narrative into our very DNA? I write about the architecture of alarm, understanding the stress response. The nervous system is divided into two primary branches: the sympathetic, which mobilizes for action, and the parasympathetic, which restores and repairs. These systems evolved to protect us, respond to genuine threats with remarkable efficiency. When our ancestors faced a predator, the sympathetic nervous system flooded their bodies with stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. Heart rate spiked, blood pressure rose, glucose flooded the bloodstream, digestion stopped, immune function paused. Every resource was redirected toward survival, fight, or flight. The response is brilliant for acute threats. The problem is, it was never designed to run continuously. Once the threat passed, the parasympathetic system was meant to engage, bringing the body back to baseline, initiating rest and repair. But modern life presents a different challenge entirely. We face not saber-toothed tigers, but traffic, deadlines, bills, notifications, news cycles, broadcasting catastrophe, workplace demands, systemic oppression, and the grinding pressure of survival in economic systems designed to extract rather than sustain. These stressors do not pass quickly. These stressors do not pass quickly. They accumulate, overlap, persist. The body remains in a state of perpetual alarm, the sympathetic system chronically activated, the parasympathetic system rarely given the chance to do its healing work. This is not adaptation. This is breakdown disguised as normal. I write about the chemical consequences. When stress becomes chronic, the biological consequences cascade through every system. Cortisol, helpful in short bursts, becomes destructive when constantly elevated. It suppresses immune function, making us vulnerable to infection and illness. It impairs memory formation and damages the hippocampus, the brain region crucial for learning. It promotes fat storage, particularly around the abdomen, increasing risk for metabolic disease. It interferes with sleep, disrupts digestion, and accelerates cellular aging. The inflammatory response, meant to heal acute injuries, becomes chronic inflammation when stress persists. A smoldering fire that damages blood vessels, joints, and organs. Chronic inflammation is now recognized as a root cause of virtually every major disease: heart disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune conditions, depression, and dementia. Meanwhile, the constant flood of stress hormones exhausts the adrenal glands and depletes neurotransmitters. What begins as hypervigilance often ends in exhaustion, burnout, the feeling of being simultaneously wired and depleted. The body has spent its reserves attempting to maintain a state it was never designed to sustain. The inheritance of pain, epigenetic trauma. How experience rewrites our biology. Perhaps the most profound discovery in recent biology is this: trauma does not end with the traumatized. The stress and suffering experienced by our ancestors can be transmitted to us through mechanisms that were, until recently, barely understood. Epigenetics, the study of how genes are turned on and off without changes to the DNA sequence itself, reveals that experience literally marks our genome. When our grandparents faced famine, war, displacement, or systemic oppression, their bodies adapted. Chemical tags were placed on certain genes, altering their expression. Some genes became more active, others suppressed, all in response to the environment and experiences encountered. These epigenetic marks can be passed to subsequent generations. The children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors show measurable differences in stress hormone regulation. The descendants of enslaved Africans carry epigenetic signatures of ancestral trauma, predisposing them to higher rates of stress-related diseases, even when controlling for current socio-economic factors. Indigenous peoples, forcibly removed from their lands and cultures, carry intergenerational wounds that manifest in altered cortisol patterns and increased vulnerability to anxiety and depression. This is not a metaphor. This is biology. The suffering of our ancestors lives in our cells, influencing how we respond to stress, how easily our nervous systems become dysregulated, and how quickly we tip from resilience into breakdown. The weight of history. For people of Africa, this epigenetic burden is particularly heavy. Centuries of enslavement, followed by Jim Crow, followed by mass incarceration and ongoing systemic racism. This is not ancient history, but continuous trauma. Each generation passing forward not just memory, but biological adaptation to conditions of perpetual threat. The Rastafari religion of Babylon's Rastafari recognition of Babylon's ongoing oppression is not paranoia, but an accurate perception. When the system is designed to keep certain populations in states of chronic stress through economic exploitation, environmental racism, police violence, healthcare disparities, and social marginalization, the biological consequences are predictable and profound. High blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, heart disease. These are not simply individual health failures, but collective wounds, the body's response to generations of systemic assault. To speak of healing, then, requires more than individual intervention. It requires recognition of the systemic forces that create and perpetuate trauma. It requires resistance to those forces, and it requires intentional practices that can begin to rewrite the biological text, to place different marks on the genes we will pass to our children. Cooling down the system, the path to regulation. Reclaiming the parasympathetic. If chronic stress is a fire burning through our biology, then healing requires learning to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response that allows restoration to occur. This is not a weakness or luxury. This is a biological necessity. Breath is the most direct tool we possess for nervous system regulation. Slow, deep breathing, particularly with extended exhalation, directly stimulates the vagus nerve, the primary conduit of parasympathetic signaling. Box breathing is a simple practice. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Exhale for 6 or 8. Repeat for 5 minutes. This is not mysticism, but mechanical intervention, using the body's own wiring to shift states. Movement, particularly rhythmic movement, helps metabolize stress hormones. Walking, dancing, drumming, these activities that our ancestors engaged in naturally provide outlets for the energy mobilized by stress response. The body releases what it has prepared to use for survival, preventing the toxic buildup that occurs when we remain frozen in fear and anger. Connection, genuine human contact, community, is perhaps the most powerful regulator of the nervous system. We are social creatures, wired to co-regulate with others. In the presence of a calm, grounded person, our own nervous system tends to match that state. This is why community is not optional, why the Rastafari emphasis on reasoning together and living in collective consciousness is not merely a cultural preference, but biological wisdom. The medicine of color. The ancients understood what modern science now confirms. Color affects consciousness, mood, and physiology. The wavelengths of light that enter our eyes influence brain chemistry directly. This knowledge is encoded in traditions from the chakra system to Rastafari's symbolic use of red, gold, and green. Green, the color of growth, of plant life, of the natural world, has measurable calming effects on the nervous system. Studies show that viewing green spaces, or even the color green itself, reduces cortisol, lowers blood pressure, and promotes parasympathetic activation. This is why time in nature heals, why gardens and forests feel restorative. We evolved in green environments, and our nervous systems remain calibrated to find peace there. Blue, the color of sky and water, similarly promotes calm. Blue light in appropriate context slows heart rate and reduces anxiety. Surrounding oneself with blues and greens, whether through nature, art, or intentional design of living space, creates an environment that supports nervous system regulation. Conversely, excessive red and bright yellow can maintain or increase sympathetic activation, useful in certain contexts, but problematic when the system needs to cool. Modern environments often assault us with harsh, activating colors and artificial lighting that keeps the nervous system in perpetual alert. The use of color then becomes a tool for healing, creating spaces dominated by calming tones, spending time in natural green and blue environments, and even visualizing these colors during meditation or breath work can support the shift from chronic stress to restoration. Gold and yellow, when used wisely, represent not agitation, but wisdom and enlightenment. The sun's energy harnessed for growth rather than destruction. The Rastafari colors themselves form a complete spectrum: red for the blood of martyrs and the fire of resistance, gold for the wealth of the land and the light of truth, and green for the earth and healing. Together, they represent balance, acknowledging both the struggle and the path to peace. Rest as resistance, the radical act of slowing down. In a world that profits from our exhaustion, that depends on our disconnection from body and earth, that requires our perpetual productivity to feed its insatiable hunger. Rest becomes an act of resistance. To choose calm in the face of manufactured urgency, to protect sleep as sacred, to say no to demands that exceed our capacity, to create boundaries that allow the nervous system to regulate. These are not selfish acts, but revolutionary ones. The system wants us tired, stressed, too depleted to resist, too overwhelmed to organize, too dysregulated to think clearly. When we reclaim rest, we reclaim power. When we heal our nervous systems, we become capable of the sustained resistance that transformation requires. This is why self-care is not superficial, but strategic. When we eat foods that stabilize blood sugar rather than spiking cortisol, when we move our bodies to release accumulated tension, when we practice breath work to activate the vagus nerve, when we create communities of mutual support, when we surround ourselves with colors and environments that promote calm, we are not escaping the struggle. We are preparing for it. We are ensuring that we remain capable, that we don't burn out, before the work is done. Healing the lineage. The beautiful hidden truth within epigenetics is this: if trauma can be inherited, so can healing. The positive changes we make in stress management, in nervous system regulation, in how we respond to adversity can also mark our genes. We can pass forward not just the wounds of our ancestors, but also the resilience we cultivate, the peace we practice, the wisdom we embody. Every time we choose rest over relentless productivity, every time we regulate our nervous systems rather than remaining in chronic stress, every time we create beauty and calm in our environments, we are writing a different story into our biology. We are giving our children and grandchildren a different inheritance. This is the ultimate defiance of oppression, to refuse to let it define us at the cellular level, to heal what was broken, to rewrite what was written in pain with the pen of intentional practice and conscious choice. The way forward. The path from chronic stress to regulation is not walked once, but daily. Not achieved, but practiced. Not a destination, but a way of being. It requires vigilance, not the vigilance of perpetual threat scanning, but the vigilance of consciousness, of noticing when the body tightens, when the breath shallows, when the old patterns of alarm assert themselves. It requires community, because we cannot regulate alone what was dysregulated by isolation and oppression. It requires connection to nature, to the green growing world that calms without trying. It requires color, beauty, rhythm, breath, touch, rest, and the courage to claim these things as necessities rather than luxuries. Most of all, it requires recognizing that our bodies are not separate from our liberation, that healing is not separate from resistance, that the work of cooling down our nervous systems is inseparable from the work of building the world we dream of. The revolution begins in the body, in the choice to honor its wisdom over the urgency of systems designed to exploit it. The pen is mightier than the sword, yes, but we are the pens, our bodies the pages. What story will we write? That is chapter 3, and let us continue. I'm looking to see, do I have any messages? I do see Kiki Blunts sending a message, and just a symbol. I can't read that, but I think she's smiling at me. Let me double check again over here. For Africa One, I see you, beloved. She did answer my question. Yes, it is readable. Thank you. She says, and I quote, "I feel the weight of our men's ancestral trauma. Our particular experience in the enforced labor camps, enslavement, has been sidelined, particularly around their sexual abuse. An issue yet to be fully addressed." I think that makes a great bit of sense. And hopefully this new book will help us to realign ourselves. I don't go directly into sex. I could maybe add that to it. But we have to realize, as black men, we're just completely thrown off and out of balance. We're supposed to be protecting our sisters, our children, protecting the family. But unfortunately, we have been so distorted and turned around that we have been turned into, we as a class, not going to include myself in this, but we've been turned into the predators. And that is a reversal, 180-degree reversal of a real man's role in family, in community, in the neighborhood, in a relationship with the mother of his children, and that simply will not stand. Let's go to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is entitled Food as Information. This quote here begins the chapter from Carolyn Myss from the book Why People Don't Heal. She writes, Your biography becomes your biology. This biography includes the totality of your choices, the things you feed your body, your thoughts, your actions, your food, the things you feed your life. From Carolyn Myss. I write, what we eat becomes who we are. There is an ancient truth in Babylon's food industry. There is an ancient truth that Babylon's food industry has worked tirelessly to obscure. Eating is not merely mechanical refueling, but simply the consumption of calories to power the body's engine. Eating is communion. It's a conversation. It is the most intimate relationship we maintain with the earth. A dialogue between ourselves and the living world. A transfer of information that rewrites our biology with every meal. When the Rastafari speak of ital living, consuming food in its most natural and vital state, they are articulating a profound scientific reality that Western, quote, nutritionism has only recently begun to understand. The food we consume carries more than protein, carbohydrates, and fats. It carries intelligence, molecular messages that speak directly to our genes, turning them on and off, or influencing which proteins get made, determining whether our cells move toward health or disease. This is not metaphor. This is the science of nutrigenomics, the study of how food interacts with our genome. Every bite is a vote, every meal a conversation, every dietary pattern a sustained argument being made to our DNA about what kind of body to build, what kind of health to manifest, what kind of future to create. The question before us is not simply, what should I eat? But what conversation am I having with my genes? What information am I transmitting to my cells? And am I speaking the language of life or the language of slow death? Wisdom of plants, phytonutrient intelligence. This goes beyond vitamins and minerals. For decades, nutritional science reduced food to its component parts, vitamins, minerals, macronutrients, as though understanding these elements separately could explain the whole. This reductionist approach gave us supplementation, fortification, and the absurd belief that we could deconstruct food, removed what seemed unnecessary, and rebuild it synthetically without consequence. The plants knew better. They always have. Plants produce tens of thousands of compounds that have nothing to do with their basic survival needs. These phytonutrients, literally plant nutrients, exist as defense mechanisms, communication systems, and environmental adaptations. When we consume plants, we consume this intelligence. These compounds enter our bodies and begin their work, activating beneficial genes, silencing harmful ones, modulating inflammation, supporting detoxification, and protecting against oxidative stress. Consider the deep purple of berries, anthocyanins that cross the blood-brain barrier to protect neurons from degeneration. The bitter compounds in cruciferous vegetables, sulforaphane, that activates genes involved in cellular detoxification and cancer prevention. The golden pigment of turmeric, curcumin, that modulates hundreds of genetic pathways involved in inflammation. The sharp bite of garlic, allicin, that supports cardiovascular health and immune function. These are not simply antioxidants or anti-inflammatory compounds, though they are those things. They are information packages, molecular messages that our cells have evolved over millions of years to recognize and respond to. Our genome expects these signals. It needs them to function properly. We talk about the rainbow protocol, very important. The diversity of color in whole plant foods represents a diversity of phytonutrient intelligence. Red tomatoes speak differently to our genes than orange carrots, which speak differently than green kale, which speaks differently than purple eggplant. Each color family carries distinct information, activates different genetic pathways, and supports different aspects of cellular function. This is why the ITAL emphasis on fresh, diverse, plant-based foods is not a cultural preference, but biological necessity. When we eat across the color spectrum, when we consume the full diversity of what the earth provides in each person, in each season, we provide our genes with the complete vocabulary they need to express optimal health. The modern diet, dominated by beige and brown processed foods made from corn, wheat, and soy, is genetic illiteracy, a conversation so impoverished, so devoid of meaningful information, that the body cannot maintain the complexity required for true vitality. We talk about the process of the violence of processing, the stripping away, how food became anti-information. What happens when food passes through industrial processing is not simply a mechanical transformation. It is the systematic removal of information, the silencing of the molecular conversation that should occur between plant and body. Take whole wheat. In its natural state, a wheat berry contains the bran, rich in fiber and B vitamins, the germ, concentrated with healthy fats, vitamin E and minerals, and the endosperm, providing carbohydrates and protein. Together, these create a complete package of information. The fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria, the fats that satisfy and stabilize blood sugar, the vitamins and minerals that support enzymatic action or enzymatic function. Industrial milling strips away the bran and germ, leaving only the endosperm, which is then pulverized into white flour, pure starch, with virtually all nutrients and nutritional intelligence removed. The body receives this not as food, but as a flood of glucose, an emergency requiring rapid insulin response, no fiber to slow absorption, no nutrients to support metabolism, no information to guide genetic expression toward health. This is not food. This is the ghost of food, the corpse of what was living, scraped clean of everything that made it nourishing. The same violence occurs across industrial food production. Oils extracted with chemical solvents and stripped of their vitamin and phytonutrient content. Fruits and vegetables picked unripe and stored for weeks while their nutritional value deteriorates. Livestock raised on feed that makes them sick and fills their flesh with inflammatory fats. Fortification, quote unquote, that attempts to add back synthetic versions of what was destroyed. never understanding that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Then we talk about the addition of poison. But processing does not merely remove, it also adds sugar in amounts that would never occur in nature, engineered to hijack reward pathways in the brain. Salt in concentrations that overwhelm our taste receptors and dysregulate blood pressure. Industrial seed oils, heated and hydrogenated into trans fats that incorporate into cell membranes and disrupt their function. Synthetic preservatives, artificial colors, flavor enhancers, chemicals masquerading as food that the body has no evolutionary framework for processing. Toxins that must be detoxified and eliminated add to the burden of our cells are already bearing. These are not foods, but food-like products. Substances designed not to nourish, but to generate profit through addiction and convenience. They speak to our genes, yes, but the message they carry is one of inflammation, oxidative stress, metabolic dysfunction, and accelerated aging. This is Babylon's offering. Pseudo-sustenance that enriches corporations while impoverishing bodies, that fills the stomach while starving cells, that creates the illusion of abundance while producing epidemic disease. We talk about the ITAL Foundation, eating as the ancestors did. Whole, fresh, living. The word ITAL comes from vital, alive, animated by life force. ITAL food is food as close to its natural state as possible. Minimally processed, preferably raw or gently steamed or cooked. Eaten soon after harvest when its vitality is strongest. This is not nostalgia, but biochemistry. Living foods contain enzymes that aid digestion, vitamins at their peak concentration, phytonutrients in their most bioavailable forms, and recent research suggests biophotons, subtle light emissions that may play a role in cellular communication. Fresh food also contains microRNAs, small molecules that survive digestion and enter our bloodstream, where they can influence gene expression directly. The microRNAs in plants, shaped by their own environmental stresses and adaptations, carry information that can modify how our genes function. We're literally incorporating the plant's experience, its adaptive intelligence, into our own biology. This is why a salad picked from the garden feels different in the body than one bought from a store. Why fruit eaten from the tree tastes more alive than fruit shipped thousands of miles. The difference is not merely psychological, it is informational. The density and integrity of the molecular messages being transmitted. We talk about the plant strong foundation. While debate rages about optimal diet, certain truths remain consistent across populations that live longest and the healthiest. They eat predominantly plants, not exclusively. Most traditional diets include some animal products, but plants form the foundation, consumed in abundance and diversity. The Rastafari emphasis on plant-based ITAL eating aligns perfectly with the science of longevity. The blue zones, regions where people routinely live past 100 in good health, all share common dietary patterns. High consumption of legumes, whole grains, vegetables, and fruits. Minimal meat, no processed foods, and eating in moderation. Plants provide fiber, which feeds the microbiome and regulates blood sugar. They provide phytonutrients that protect against disease. They provide minerals and vitamins in forms the body readily recognizes. They alkalize rather than acidify the body. They reduce inflammation rather than promoting it. They support rather than burden the detoxification systems. Animal products, particularly in industrial form, carry different information. Meat from animals raised on unnatural feed, confined and stressed, treated with antibiotics and hormones. This flesh carries the animal's suffering, its inflammatory profile, its toxic burden. The body receives this information along with protein and fat. This is not to say that all animal products are harmful, even though I will say I do not eat any animal products. Traditional peoples who consume meat from wild or well-raised animals in modest amounts do not show the disease patterns of those eating industrially produced meat daily. But the ITAL principle of centering plants, of consuming them fresh and whole, of letting them form the bulk of calories and nutrition, this is validated by every serious study of diet and longevity. The biochemistry of life and death. What happens at the cellular level? When you eat a meal of whole plant foods, say beans and rice with vegetables, a traditional combination found across cultures, here is what occurs at the molecular level. Point 1. The fiber begins feeding beneficial bacteria in your gut, which ferment it into short-chain fatty acids. These fatty acids reduce inflammation, strengthen the gut barrier, and provide energy to the cells lining your intestine. They also travel to the brain, where they influence neurotransmitter production and protect against depression. Point 2. The phytonutrients from the vegetables activate a transcription factor called NRF2, which turns on genes involved in antioxidant production and detoxification. Your cells begin making enzymes that neutralize free radicals and eliminate toxins. Point 3. The legumes provide protein and resistant starch, which further feeds the microbiome and stabilizes blood sugar. The slow release of glucose prevents insulin spikes that over time lead to insulin resistance and diabetes. Next point, the minerals from the plants, magnesium, potassium, calcium, and zinc support hundreds of enzymatic reactions. Your cells can produce energy efficiently, your nervous system can regulate properly, your bones can maintain their structure. This is food as information working correctly. Messages that tell genes to express health, that support rather than burden cellular function, that provide the raw materials for repair and renewal. Next, we discuss the processed food cascade. Now consider a typical processed meal, a fast food burger with fries and soda. Point: the refined carbohydrates in the bun and fries flood your bloodstream with glucose, spiking insulin dramatically. Your pancreas must work overtime. Your cells, repeatedly exposed to insulin surges, began to resist its signal, setting the stage for metabolic disease. Point: the industrial seed oils used for frying, heating to high temperatures, oxidize and form compounds that damage cell membranes and promote inflammation. These fats incorporate into your cellular structure, disrupting normal function for weeks. Point: the processed meat from animals raised in confinement and disease carry antibiotics that disrupt your microbiome. killing beneficial bacteria that took years to cultivate. The loss of microbial diversity impairs everything from digestion to immune system to mood regulation. Point: the sugar in the soda spikes blood glucose even higher while providing zero nutrients to support its metabolism. Your body must pull minerals from its reserves to process this flood of empty calories. Point: the preservatives, colors, and flavors, chemicals with no place in human biology, must be detoxified by your liver, adding to its burden while providing no benefit whatsoever. The absence of fiber means nothing feeds your beneficial bacteria. The absence of phytonutrients means no activation of protective genetic pathways. The absence of enzymes, vitamins, and bioactive compounds means your cells receive calories but no information, fuel but no intelligence. This is food-like product as anti-information. Messages that tell genes to express inflammation, that burden cellular systems, that deplete rather than replenish. This is the very essence of malnutrition. Next, we talk about eating for longevity, the practical path. And we begin with the ITAL principles applied. To eat for longevity, for vitality, for the kind of health that allows us to serve and resist and build the world we envision, we must return to principles that our ancestors understood. Point 1, eat food that was recently alive. The closer to harvest, the more intact the information. Grow your own when possible. Buy from local farmers. Choose fresh over stored, whole over processed. Point 2, an important point, eat the rainbow. Every color represents different phytonutrient families, different genetic conversations. Aim for diversity across meals and across the weeks. The more varied your plant intake, the more complete the information your genes receive. Point: center your plate on plants, legumes, whole grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds. Let these form the bulk of your calories. If you eat animal products, treat them as condiments or occasional additions rather than centerpieces. Point: eat food your ancestors would recognize. If your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize it as food, approach it with suspicion. The body has not evolved to process substances invented in the last 50 years. Honor traditional combinations. The pairing of beans and rice, of corn and beans, of whole grains and vegetables, these combinations that appear across culture exist because they work, providing complete proteins and complementary nutrients. Traditional wisdom about food combinations often reflects deep biochemical logic. Point: fast periodically. Every tradition includes periods of fasting or restricted eating. Modern science reveals why. Fasting activates autophagy, the cellular cleanup process that removes damaged components. It shifts gene expression toward longevity pathways. It gives the digestive system time to repair. Time-restricted eating, consuming your day's food within a 6 to 8 hour window, or even a 12-hour window. Intermittent fasting provides many of these benefits while remaining sustainable. Next point, eat in community. The nervous system regulation that occurs when we eat with others, the slowing down, the gratitude, the conversation, this affects digestion and nutrient absorption. Food consumed in stress or isolation is not processed the same way as food consumed in peace and connection. The political dimension of food choices. To eat ital in Babylon is an act of resistance. The industrial food system depends on our consumption of processed foods with high profit margins and addictive properties. It requires our disconnection from land, from seasons, from the knowledge of how to even feed ourselves. When we choose whole foods over processed, when we grow even a small portion of what we eat, when we learn to cook, when we support farmers practicing regenerative agriculture, when we reclaim food sovereignty, we're not merely improving personal health. We're withdrawing support from systems of exploitation and rebuilding systems of sustenance. This is why food justice and health justice are inseparable from broader liberation struggles. Access to real food, to land, to clean water, to knowledge of traditional foodways, these are not peripheral concerns, but central to any vision of collective freedom. The body cannot be liberated if it is poisoned, depleted, kept in a state of chronic disease that makes sustained resistance impossible. Eating well is not selfishness, but preparation, not individual indulgence, but collective necessity. The conversation continues. Every meal is an opportunity to nourish or deplete, to inform or confuse, to support cellular intelligence or override it. The conversation between food and genes never stops. The only question is what we choose to say. Will we speak the language of life, the complex, nuanced vocabulary of whole plants, fresh and diverse, eaten in rhythm with the seasons and in community with others? Or will we accept the impoverished dialect of processed foods, the messages of inflammation and destruction that Babylon offers as sustenance? The genes are listening. They are remarkably responsive, remarkably forgiving. It is never too late to change the conversation, to begin speaking more truthfully to our own biology, to honor the wisdom that flows from soil to plant to body. This is ital living. This is food as information. This is the reclaiming of the most fundamental power we possess, the power to determine 3 times a day what kind of body we build, what kind of health we manifest, what kind of future we create. The earth provides everything we need. The question is whether we will accept her offerings with gratitude and consciousness, or continue consuming the counterfeits that profit from our sickness. Choose life. Eat ital. Let the conversation between food and genes become a dialogue of healing, vitality, and resistance. This is how we build bodies strong enough to carry the struggle, clear-minded enough to see the path, vital enough to sustain the long work of liberation. What we eat becomes who we are. Let us become conscious, rooted, vital children of the earth, eating as she intended, living as Jah designed. That completes that chapter and the first triad, the section of the book. We go now into part 2 of the book, the ancestral anchor, the heritage. And the focus of part 2 deals with history, identity, and dignity, the lion and gold elements. This is very, very important part of the book. Please do let me know what you think about what you're hearing. I see you in the house, Brother Eddie McCrory. What a joy it is to have you with us today. And he says greetings to everyone. And thank you. I ask everybody out there, if you can, please do hit the like button. on whatever platform you are viewing us at. I love to know that you are in the house. When you hit the like button, it lets me know, not in real time, but it does definitely let me know eventually that you were tuned in. And so I just want to thank you for being with us. And here, 1 second, I'm just going to hit the like button myself. And thank you for being tuned in, Kiki Blunts, as well as Eddie McCrory. Great to have you with us. I'm going to keep reading. We're kind of getting through the book because the book is coming out much sooner than what you might expect. Chapter 5, Origins, Echoes of Origin. Echoes of Origin. Now we're going to start to talk about the inheritance. I begin once again with a quote. This from John Mbiti, writing from the book African Religions and Philosophy. He writes, and I quote, "Wherever the African is, there is his religion. He carries it to the fields where he is sowing seeds or harvesting a new crop. If he is educated, he takes it with him to the examination room at the school or in the university." The first footprints. In the beginning, there was Africa, not merely as a geographical location, but simply as continental, not simply as continental landmass, but as origin, the cradle where humanity itself was born, where the first conscious thought emerged, where the first tools were crafted, where the first stories were told under star-filled skies. This is not a metaphor or mythology. It is an established scientific fact, confirmed by genetics, paleontology, and archaeology. Every human being alive today, regardless of appearance or location, traces their lineages back to Africa. The oldest human fossils, the earliest evidence of symbolic thought, the first indications of art, music, and sophisticated social organization all emerged from African soil. Yet this truth, fundamental, verifiable, world-altering, has been systematically obscured, minimized, and distorted by centuries of colonial propaganda that sought to erase African achievement, to justify enslavement and exploitation by painting the continent as primitive, not primitive, but primitive, as backward, as lacking history or culture worth preserving. That lie was so thorough, so pervasive, so deeply embedded into educational systems and cultural narratives that even those of African ascent came to believe it. We were taught to look to Greece and Rome as the pinnacles of civilization, to Europe as the source of enlightenment, to anywhere but the motherland as the wellspring of human achievement. This is the deepest theft of colonization, not merely stealing the land, the stealing of land, resources, and bodies, but the theft of memory itself, the severing of people from their own magnificence, the erasure of the gold that every human carries within them as children of the first continent. To heal, we must remember. To build the future, we must reclaim the past. To know our value, we must understand our origin. Before the ships came, Africa's forgotten brilliance. We began with the Nile Valley civilizations. Long before Rome rose, before Athens philosophized, before Jerusalem became holy, the Nile Valley was home to civilizations of stunning sophistication. Ancient Kemet, what colonizers later renamed Egypt, was not merely a collection of impressive monuments, but also a civilization that lasted over 3,000 years, longer than any empire in European history. The pyramids of Giza, built nearly 5,000 years ago, required mathematical and engineering knowledge that scholars still struggle to fully explain. Perfect right angles, precise astronomical alignments, stones weighing multiple tons moved and placed with tolerances measured in millimeters. This was not the work of a primitive people, but of master engineers, mathematicians, and architects. The ancient Kemetic understanding of medicine was centuries ahead of its time. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to 1600 before the Common Era, describes surgical procedures and anatomical observations with remarkable precision. They performed brain surgery, understood the pulse as connected to the heart, developed treatments for wounds and infections that reveal sophisticated understanding of human physiology. Their mathematics gave the world geometry, literally meaning, quote, earth measurement, unquote. They developed initially to reestablish boundaries after the Nile's annual floods. They calculated the solar year to within minutes of modern measurements. They developed a decimal system, understood fractions, and solved complex equations. Their writing, hieroglyphics, was not primitive picture drawing, but a sophisticated system containing phonetic and ideographic elements, capable of expressing complex philosophical, scientific, and literary ideas. The texts they produced covered everything from astronomy to poetry, from engineering manuals to ethical philosophy. But Kemet was not alone. To the south, in what is now Sudan, the kingdom of Kush arose, at times conquering and ruling over Egypt itself. The Kushite pharaohs of the 25th dynasty reunited a fractured Egypt and ruled for nearly a century. Their capital, Meroe, became a center of iron production that helped spread metallurgy throughout Africa. West African empires, gold, knowledge, and power. While Europe languished in what it calls the Dark Ages, West Africa flourished. The Ghana Empire, rising around 300 of the Common Era, controlled vast gold and salt trade routes, accumulating wealth that made its rulers legendary across the known world. The title Ghana means warrior king, reflecting both military prowess and sophisticated political organization. The Mali Empire that followed Ghana reached even greater heights. Under Mansa Musa, who ruled in the early 14th century, Mali became perhaps the wealthiest nation on earth. When Mansa Musa made his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he traveled with an entourage of 60,000, including 12,000 enslaved persons, each carrying gold. He gave away so much gold in Cairo that he caused inflation that lasted a year. But Mali's greatness was not merely material. Timbuktu, under Malian rule, became one of the world's greatest centers of learning. The University of Sankore housed 25,000 students and one of the largest libraries in the world. Students came from across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, and literature. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were produced, covering every field of knowledge. The Songhai Empire, succeeding Mali, continued this tradition of learning and prosperity. Askia Muhammad the Great established a system of government that included separate executive, legislative, and judicial branches, concepts that would not appear in Europe for centuries. These were not isolated examples, but part of a broader pattern of African achievement that colonialism has systematically erased from popular consciousness. The Great Zimbabwe and Southern Africa. In Southern Africa, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe built stone structures of such sophistication that when European colonizers first encountered them, they refused to believe that Africans capable of such construction. Great Zimbabwe, built between the 11th and 15th centuries, features massive stone walls constructed without mortar, using a technique that made them earthquake resistant and enduring. This was the capital of a vast trading empire that exported gold, ivory, and other goods as far away as China and India. Archaeological evidence reveals glass beads from Venice, porcelain from China, and coins from Arabia, proof of extensive international trade networks managed by African merchants and rulers. The denial of African agency in building the Great Zimbabwe claims that it must have been Phoenicians or other non-Africans who constructed it, reveals the depth of colonial psychological warfare. Even confronted with physical evidence of African architectural genius, the colonizers could not allow it to challenge their narrative of African inferiority. East Africa and the Swahili coast. The East African coast developed a unique Swahili civilization, blending African, Arab, and Asian influences through extensive Indian African ocean trade. City-states like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar became cosmopolitan centers where merchants from across the known world conducted business in multiple languages. This Swahili developed a distinct language that became the lingua franca of East Africa, a language rich enough to produce written literature, poetry, historical chronicles. They built mosques, palaces, and stone houses with indoor plumbing, luxuries that most Europeans at the time could not even imagine. The Kingdom of Aksum, in what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea, was one of the four great powers of the ancient world, along with Rome, Persia, and China. It developed its own written script, Ge'ez, still used in Ethiopian Orthodox liturgy today. It minted its own currency, built towering obelisks, and established Christianity as a state religion in the 4th century, making it one of the oldest Christian civilizations in the world. We talk about the wisdom of oral tradition, memory beyond writing, the griots and keepers of history. The Western obsession with written records as the only valid form of history has led to the dismissal of oral traditions as unreliable, as myth rather than fact. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how knowledge can be preserved and transmitted. Across Africa, the rule of the griot, the oral historian Jeli, musician and keeper of lineage, was highly specialized and deeply respected. Jeli underwent years of training, memorizing vast genealogies, histories, and cultural knowledge. They were walking libraries, and I would say we are walking libraries, capable of reciting the histories of kingdoms spanning centuries, the lineages of families going back generations, the wisdom accumulated over lifetimes. The training of a Jeli was as rigorous as any academic discipline. Young Jeli learned mnemonic techniques, memory aids, associative methods, and performed histories repeatedly until they could recite them flawlessly. This oral tradition is not casual storytelling, but precise transmission of knowledge with built-in checks. Multiple Jele could know the same histories, and any deviation from accepted accounts could be corrected by peers. Modern research has validated the accuracy of oral histories. When archaeologists and historians compare oral accounts with physical evidence and written records from other sources, they find remarkable correlation. The oral tradition preserves not just the broad outlines of history, but specific details, names, dates, events, with accuracy that rivals written records. The living archive. What writing preserves in static form, oral tradition preserves as living knowledge, continuously relevant and contextualized. When a Jele tells a story, they adapt it to the audience, emphasizing lessons relevant to current circumstances while maintaining the essential truth. This makes the past continuously accessible and applicable rather than archived and distant. Oral tradition also preserves what writing often emits: emotion, context, nuance, the relational and spiritual dimensions of events. A written account might record that a battle occurred, who won, and the date. An oral account preserves why the battle mattered, what it meant to the people who lived through it, how it changed the community, and what lessons it offered for future generations. The African emphasis on oral tradition reflects a sophisticated understanding that knowledge is not merely information to be stored, but wisdom to be lived, not facts to be cataloged, but truths to be embodied and passed forward through relationship. That brings us to the idea of proverbs as compressed wisdom. African proverbs represent another form of knowledge preservation. Wisdom compressed in a memorable, poetic form. These are not quaint sayings, but sophisticated philosophical statements, ethical guidelines, and practical advice refined over generations. Quote, "When a spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion," unquote. A statement about collective power and the strength of unity. Quote, "A bird that flies off the earth and lands on an anthill is still on the ground," unquote. Reminding that superficial change is not transformation. Quote, "The ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people," unquote. Recognizing that social health depends on family and community integrity. These proverbs encoded complex ideas in forms that could be easily remembered and transmitted. That could be unpacked and applied to diverse situations that carried layers of meaning accessible at different levels of understanding. This is sophisticated pedagogical technology developed and refined over millennia. Next, knowing your gold, the importance of origin. And we talk about the psychological warfare of colonization. Psychological warfare, it's called. The transatlantic enslavement trade did not merely steal bodies. It attempted to steal souls, identities, and histories. Enslaved Africans were forbidden from speaking their languages, practicing their religions, maintaining their cultural traditions. Names were stripped away and replaced with those of enslavers. Family structures were deliberately destroyed through separation. This was not accidental cruelty, but strategic warfare. The colonizers understood that people disconnected from their origins, from their sense of worth and identity, are far easier to control. If you can convince people that they came from nothing, that their ancestors achieved nothing, that their culture is primitive and their history shameful, you can keep them in perpetual psychological bondage even after physical chains are removed. The descendants of enslaved Africans in the Americas, CARICOM, and elsewhere were systematically taught to be ashamed of Africa, to see it as a dark continent, to be escaped rather than a proud heritage to be claimed. Meanwhile, Africans remaining on the continent were colonized, their resources extracted, their governance structure destroyed, their education systems redesigned to produce subjects rather than citizens, workers rather than thinkers. This dual assault on those taken from Africa and those who remained served the same purpose: to maintain European dominance by ensuring that African people, wherever, whoever, and wherever they were, would not recognize their own power, would not remember their own achievements, would not claim their rightful place as the original people, the first humans, the ancestors of all civilization. Reclaiming the gold within. The Rastafari concept of recognizing one's, quote, gold, one's intrinsic value, divine nature, and ancestral magnificence is not ego or empty pride. It is a psychological necessity, the antidote for centuries of systemic dehumanization. When you understand that your ancestors built the pyramids, that they performed surgery while Europeans were still using leeches, that they established universities while Europe was barely literate, that they created sophisticated systems of governance, philosophy, and science. When you truly grasp this, something fundamental shifts in consciousness. You cannot be made to feel inferior when you know you descend from the people who civilized the world. You cannot be convinced of your inherent inadequacy when you understand your lineage includes the first astronomers, the first mathematicians, the first philosophers. You cannot internalize the coloniser's narrative when you know the truth of who you are and where you come from. This is why knowing African history, real history, not the distorted colonial version, is not academic exercise, but spiritual practice. Not intellectual curiosity, but psychological survival. It is the reclaim of self, the restoration of dignity, the reconnection to source. The DNA remembers. Modern genetic research added another dimension to this reclaiming of origin. DNA testing now allows people of African descent, particularly those whose ancestors were enslaved, to trace their roots to specific regions, sometimes even specific ethnic groups within Africa. This is powerful, not because genetics determines identity. Culture, experience, and choice matter as much or more, but because it provides concrete connection where colonization sought to create permanent severance. It answers the questions that haunts descendants of the enslaved. Where exactly did my people come from? But beyond individual connections, genetics has definitively confirmed what oral tradition and anthropology long suggested. All humans were African. Every human on Earth carries genetic markers that trace back to Africa. We are all ultimately children of the motherland. This should fundamentally reshape how we think about race, about human diversity, about who belongs where. There is no, quote, other. There is only family, separated by time and geography, but united by origin. The differences we see are recent adaptations to different environments, variations within one species, one family, one human story that began in Africa. The continuing resonance, why origin matters now. We talk about identity and mental health. The psychological impact of disconnection from cultural roots cannot be overstated. Study after study shows that people with strong cultural identity, with knowledge of their heritage, with connection to ancestral traditions, show better mental health outcomes, higher resilience to stress, stronger sense of purpose, and greater overall well-being. Conversely, cultural alienation correlates with depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and various forms of self-destructive behavior. When people do not know where they come from, when they have been taught their origins are shameful, when they lack cultural anchoring, they are more vulnerable to every form of psychological distress. For people of African descent, reclaiming knowledge of pre-colonial Africa achievement is therapeutic. It provides context for current struggles, understanding that poverty and dysfunction in African communities are products of colonization and enslavement, not evidence of inherent inferiority. It provides inspiration. Knowing what our ancestors achieved reveals what we are capable of achieving. It provides identity, a sense of belonging to something larger, older, more significant than individual struggle. Epistemological liberation. Knowing African history also challenges the epistemological dominance of Western thought. The assumption that European ways of knowing, organizing, and being are the only valid or sophisticated approaches. When you understand that Africa developed complex philosophical systems, sophisticated governance structures, advanced scientific knowledge, and rich spiritual traditions, you stop accepting European frameworks as universal or inevitable. You recognize them as one approach among many, often not the best for most humans to approach. This opens space for alternative ways of organizing society, of conceptualizing justice, of relating to nature, of defining success and human flourishing. It allows us to draw on African traditions of communalism over individualism, of restorative rather than punitive justice, of elderhood and ancestral reverence, of oral and embodied knowledge alongside written. The decolonization of mind that Rastafari emphasizes requires this epistemological shift. The recognition that Babylon's way is not the only way. That our ancestors knew things that have been forgotten or suppressed. That moving forward may require reaching back to reclaim that which was lost or stolen along the way. Building the future on a solid foundation. We cannot build a liberated future on a foundation of lies about the past. We cannot create healthy communities when people have been disconnected from the source of their strength. We cannot resist systems of oppression when we have internalized the oppressor's narrative about our worthlessness. This is why African history, our story, a real, honest, comprehensive African our story must be taught. Not as supplement or special topic, but as central to understanding human history, because it is central. Not as feel-good stories or ethnic pride exercises, but as rigorous scholarship revealing truth. Young people of African descent need to learn about Mansa Musa and Askia the Great, about the universities of Timbuktu and the libraries of Alexandria, about the metallurgy of Great Zimbabwe and the architecture of ancient Kemet, about the oral traditions that preserved knowledge across centuries, the proverbs that encoded wisdom for generations. They need to learn this not to feel superior to others, but to feel equal, to know that they come from brilliance, that their potential is unlimited, that their ancestors' achievements set a standard worth aspiring to. And young people of other backgrounds need to learn this too, to understand that human achievement is genuinely universal, that every continent has contributed to civilization, that the story they were taught about European exceptionalism is false and harmful. The echoes grow louder. The echoes of our origin grow louder in this moment. More people are seeking their roots, doing DNA tests, traveling to Africa, learning African languages, and studying African history. The internet, for all of its problems, has made it harder to maintain the wall of ignorance that colonization built around African achievement. African scholars are reclaiming our own narratives, writing our own histories from African perspectives rather than accepting European interpretations. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal evidence of African sophistication that challenges colonial narratives. Genetic research keeps confirming African primacy in human development. The truth is emerging despite centuries of suppression. The question is whether we will listen, whether we will allow it to transform our understanding, whether we will use this knowledge to build something new. Personal and collective work. Reclaiming knowledge of origin is both personal and collective work. Individually, it means educating ourselves, seeking out African history from legitimate sources, connecting with cultural traditions, learning languages, traveling to the continent if possible, and exploring family genealogy. Collectively, it means demanding that schools teach real African history, supporting African scholars and institutions, creating cultural spaces where African traditions can be practiced and passed forward, building economic systems that honor rather than exploit African contributions, and working to dismantle the continuing impacts of colonization. It means recognizing that this is not only the work of people of African descent, although we have particular urgency and stake in it, but the work of anyone committed to truth, to justice, to a more complete and honest understanding of human history. The gold standard. The gold that the Rastafari speak of, the inherent value, the divine spark, the ancestral magnificence, is not something that must be earned or proven. It simply is. It exists, whether acknowledged or denied, whether remembered or forgotten, whether claimed or rejected. But claiming it, remembering it, living from that place of knowing, this changes everything. It changes how we walk through the world, how we respond to challenges, how we raise our children, and how we build our communities, and how we envision that future. When you know you descend from people who turned the Nile Valley into a garden, who built monuments that have stood for 5 millennia, established universities when most of the world was illiterate, who developed sophisticated philosophy and science and art, you cannot be broken by temporary setbacks. You cannot internalize narratives of inferiority. You cannot accept less than what your ancestors achieved and what you are capable of achieving. This is not about living in the past. It's about understanding the past well enough to build a worthy future. It is about knowing the roots are strong so the branches can reach higher. In conclusion, listening to the echoes. The echoes of our origin call us across millennia. In the DNA that carries markers of African ancestry, in the stories preserved by the Jelly and elders, in the monuments that still stand against desert sands, in the languages that still carry ancient wisdom, in the music and art and cultural practices that survived the Middle Passage and colonization. These echoes remind us of who we are, where we came from, and what we are capable of. They challenge the lies that have been taught about African primitiveness, about European superiority, about who belongs at the center of human history. The truth is, Human civilization began in Africa. The first tools, the first art, the first conscious thought, the first spiritual practices, the first complex societies all emerged from African soil, from African minds, from African hands. Every person alive today carries Africa with them, whether they acknowledge it or not. We are all ultimately Africans who spread across the world, adapting to new environments, but carrying forward the intelligence, the creativity, the resilience that first emerged in the motherland. To know this, to truly grasp it, is to understand that we are not separate but united, not competitors but family, not isolated individuals but part of a story billions of years in the making. A story that began in Africa and will continue as long as humans walk the earth. Listen to the echoes. Learn the history. Claim the gold within. Build the future on the solid foundation of truth about the past. This is how we heal. This is how we rise. This is how we become worthy descendants of those first footprints in African soil, those first humans who looked up at the stars and wondered, who made tools and art and music, who told stories and remembered them, who built civilizations that shaped the world. We are their children. We carry their gold. It is time that we remember. So on that note, I'm going to wrap it up today. We're going to come back tomorrow and we're going to pick it up from chapter 6 as we continue this book. I think it's a very important book for you and I to understand. And we're going to do the best we can to do everything we can to reclaim all of this. Let me just go through and see if we have any other messages from our listening audience that have come through. And I'm seeing on YouTube no new messages. Let me go over here and check out with my Rumble family and see if we have any messages there. Bear with me, where are we at? And from the Rumble family, I'm not seeing any messages there either. There's another page here open. Bear with me. It's well worth waiting for. And we're not getting any messages coming through. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and check it today for the end of our program. Oh, I do see some messages. We have in the house TKM Kwele says, great information, Baba. Thank you, thank you. I do see for Africa One. I feel the trauma, the weight of our men's ancestral trauma. We read that earlier. It's an issue yet to be fully addressed, and that's very serious. Black men are going to have to come forward to address our own trauma. And I'm going to do the best that I can to help our brothers come along, because we are being beat up on so many fronts that now the colonizing system feels free to come after our women and children right in our face. And this is not going to be allowed to stand. So we're going to pick it up tomorrow with chapter 6 of the new book, The Psychology of Heritage, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. We're going to decode that. We're grateful to Dr. Joy DeGruy for giving us this point of reference, a point of meditation. And the new book decodes post-traumatic slave syndrome. And it's a condition which we now know can be overcome with words, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. So on that note, I want to thank you all for tuning in today. And, I meant to do this. I'm going to put up a link to the book. I did just create a link. Now, the book will not be shipping for another 2 weeks. I'll be shipping the book in 2 weeks when I get it back from the printer. But I do have my link for it, as well as my ISBN, etc. So let me put up that link here in the chats, where we have great information to share with you all. There it is in the Rumble family, and put it up for our YouTube family. And T.K. Mkwele writes, great information, Baba. We must retrain our nervous system to engage in our own cultural paradigm. You got it. You got it. You hit that right on point. We must retrain our nervous system through words, sound, power, sight, vision, icons, symbolic, symbols, everything. The parables, all very important. You got that right on point. I'm very proud of you. In fact, I may use that quote in the promotion for the book. So I put up a link to the book. Somebody out there, hopefully today, will be the first to purchase the book. Now, when you are the first one to purchase one of my books, I will actually acknowledge that in the autograph I put in the book. This is the first issue ever sold. So you will get the autograph copy if you buy it from the link I just shared. And I cannot emphasize the fact that we have got to begin to move very deliberately. I'm going to just close down these pages and go back to my over here, and I want to go back to my Facebook page and make sure I have the links up to be able to purchase the book. I'm going to put like there on Facebook. Here is the link to purchase the book on PayPal. And the picture you see there of me, that's the jelly. That is the African griot. The jelly was a storyteller, but he was also a musician. And guess what? I am all of that. I am a musician, and I am the jelly, the storyteller. So on that note, I think we did get it all in for today. Wow. I did a lot of reading today. And I'm going to also be replaying my appearance on the Carl Nelson show this morning. You will hear that in about maybe 2 hours or so. Or maybe I'll just start to replay that right now, because the conversation we had today was dealing with the new book. I will be on with Sister Jaquetta on Wednesday on the Inner Light Radio Network, and we're going to pursue this book again. I am so excited about this new book and what we have and what we can do with what we have. I think is very profound. So on that note, I want to thank you all for tuning in today. On your favorite, we aim to be your favorite. We are LIV Radio, LIV TV, livinginblack.com. On that note, I am out of here, and I'm trying the best I can to get this thing to connect with my Bluetooth speaker over here, and it's supposed to come out of this tiny little device, and it's not going to work, and I don't have the patience for it right now. On that note, you've been tuned into your favorite. We aim to be your favorite. We are LIV Radio, LIV TV. We are livinginblack.com. Peace and prosperity to each and every one of you.